Well, in his State of the Nation address on Thursday, President Cyril Ramaphosa had pledged to finalise the Whistleblower Protection Framework and introduce the Whistleblower Protection Bill in Parliament during his this financial year. He also warned that firm action will be taken against those who seek to silence people who speak out against corruption. And Public Interest SA has since welcomed this commitment, saying it marks a significant milestone in South Africa's ongoing efforts to strengthen accountability and combat corruption. Let's now welcome Public Interest SA's Mr. Tebogo Khaas. Mr. Khaas, always a pleasure, sir, as a long advocate and voice for whistleblower protection. I'm sure you're pretty happy with the news of the pledge on the Whistleblower Protection Bill being introduced in Parliament. Good afternoon. What do you expect it to comprise of?
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me once again. Look, it's not yet Uhuru. Making an announcement is one thing. Seeing the bill being published or introduced for public comment is another. Passing the legislation is the ultimate ideal. So whilst we welcome the President's pronouncement during the State of the Nation address, we are mindful of the fact that it has also been more than 3 years. We as Public Interest has been pushing for this type of legislation changes. And we are glad that over the years, there has been a movement towards appreciating the fact that a lot needs to be done insofar as the plight of whistleblowers and whistleblowing in South Africa. And to the extent that the President has now made a commitment that this will be done during this session of Parliament, we hope that by the end of this year, we will see the new legislation finally approved and signed. Remember, he still has to assent to it. So, and we are encouraged when Deputy Minister Andrew Nel addressed us during our whistleblower summit last year. He did make this commitment, and some amongst us were a bit more skeptical or the cynical about it. We're happy that the President is now moving ahead, and we must commend even the Department of Justice under the Minister Kubai, who have taken the courage to ensure that there's movement. It is not easy crafting legislation. It does take time, but we hope that they'll move with speed, just as we've seen the speed with which legislatures can move when they disbanded the Scorpions.
Now, as an integral part in the advocacy of this bill, Tebogo, have you been consulted or even invited by the various authorities in terms of being quite an integral part of the drafting of the bill, because the organization has been spearheading for such reform? So as a means to ensure that those who expose the truth are not either victimized or worse, even killed.
Yeah, we amongst many other civil society organizations and activists who've been pushing for this. You'll recall there was a draft discussion document that was published, I think, about over a year ago. To be safe, it could be 2 years, and we did make input insofar as how we envisaged the new legislative framework to look like for whistleblowing, and we did see an appreciation of that because that saw the ball move forward. But having said that, we're also mindful of the fact that it's more a matter of procedures, and once we can only comment, just like anybody else, once the bill has been published. And we want to believe that most of civil society organizations such as ourselves did make input in what would inform the bill, which we haven't seen yet. We had made submissions to the department 3 years ago, unsolicited, where we were making measures in terms of issues of compensation or incentivizing whistleblowing and making sure that the plights of whistleblowers is taken care of. Things like psychosocial support, legal support, and many other interventions, which we now see the President referring to. Obviously, we can only comment much more intelligently once we see the bill when it's published.
Absolutely. And according to the Deputy Minister, the reform process aims to broaden the definition of whistleblower to also include contractors, consultants, and even members of the public there, Tebogo. So I'd love to get your views also on the criminalization of retaliation aspect, right? I mean, we live in a society full of crooks and whistleblowers. In the case of Babita, for example, whom we understand had told her closest superior, then subsequently got assassinated without them having done anything. So till this stage, we're not sure if that person was actually involved in the assassination of Babita Deokaran. So because of the people who ordered the hit, they also seem to disappear into thin air, then justice is not delivered at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Hang on the issue of retaliation, and I'll respond to you. You've mentioned something important. You'd remember one of the gaps that was actually in the existing, or that still is in the existing legislation, was that definition of a whistleblower was too narrow and restrictive, and it only pertained to employer-employee relationship, where you can only be regarded as a whistleblower if you're an employee, and you've got channels through which you follow. And we know that small businesses or entrepreneurs themselves have met instances where procurement processes have been flouted, where a long of wrongdoing or corruption they've observed, but because they're not considered whistleblowers, it becomes very difficult for them to actually report such instances unless they lose their contracts, or they are no longer considered for any opportunities in future. So that's a very important and key distinction, being able to make sure you expand the definition of whistleblower to even expand to any member of society who sees wrongdoing to actually speak up and encourage that. Now, talking about the issue of retaliation. Retaliation is a very, very serious issue, and that has really seen many instances where people have been isolated at work, made sure that they are blocked from any consideration for promotion or participation meaningfully in the job environment. In some instances, you find that even bogus charges are laid against whistleblowers to make sure that they don't actually get to see through the matter. In other words, they will trump up charges will be preferred against you. I'll give you an example of one whistleblower, Martha Ngoye, who, despite the fact that she has been cleared by many other tribunals at PRASA, she's still facing litigation by PRASA itself, despite so many actions. So such retaliation, we should be able to identify those individuals who are behind this retaliation and make sure that they actually get to be mulcted. In other words, fined punitively, to make sure that whatever cost that PRASA or such an entity incurs, it is actually it comes out of their own pocket, because this is just malicious. So retaliation is very key issue to actually look at. And it's not only in government, even in the private sector, where oftentimes people keep quiet because either the reputation of the company, they'll be threatened that if you speak out, you'll be smearing the reputation of the company, or they'll make sure that you actually get fired, even trumped up charges again. So it is important to make sure that message is sent clearly and unequivocally to anyone who attempts to interfere or retaliate against whistleblowers, and make sure that they actually face the music. And so this legislation that we anticipate it will make sure that penalties, as the president said, are actually enforced against those who retaliate. If you talk about Babita, for example, she didn't know at the time that actually the person that she was reporting this matter to, her boss, was actually in cahoots with those who are benefiting from such corruption at Tembisa Hospital and also within the Gauteng health system. And there we are. The most gruesome type of retaliation she met was her ultimate demise, and which makes it difficult for people to even, how do you trust, if you can't trust your superior, who else will you be able to trust? Which is when we welcome the introduction or the whole notion of coming up with the Office of Public Integrity, where whistleblowing incidents can actually be reported outside an organization to make sure that you are removed from being retaliated upon directly by those superiors unto whom we may have trusted and let the information, gave them information about wrongdoing. So we're encouraging to make sure that this legislation take care of retaliation and make sure that it is dealt with.
All right, Tebogo, thank you so much for your input. Mr. Tebogo Khaas is of the Public Interest Essay on the Whistleblower Protection Bill being introduced in Parliament soon.